Okay, right. Hello, welcome back to another video where we're talking about organization and folder structures and generally making sure that our projects are as clean and easy to use as possible for our own benefit, for our teammates' benefit, and generally just sort of avoiding problems and avoiding bugs that we might create and wasting resources, etc. So last time we talked about folder structure, how best to arrange things in folders. We talked about collections and favorites as ways of sort of further enhancing that. We talked about different search parameters, so using, for example, the not command or the or command, and that one. It'd help if I could type. There we go. So now I have anything that is fire and smoke or cloud, but not fire, which is a really nice way of sort of investigating our project and getting these things. Now I want to talk a little bit about the actual data that we're importing. So we've talked about how we're folders and structures and the asset side of the project over here, but what about the things that are actually contained within it? Well, let's start with textures. And if I go to my texture library, couple of things that I notice immediately looking at these. This is a good texture. Is this good? Well, it's good enough. It has a directionality to it. Now, depending on whether it's being fired forwards or whether it's kind of coming out of the ground, well, we can invert that quite easily within our shader. But what we can't do, or what we want it to do, is when we're making particles that are velocity aligned, then the texture alignment defaults to Y up. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I have an arrow on my texture, if I just draw an arrow, the up direction will be the default velocity aligned direction. Now, because of that, anything that has a one-dimensional element to our texture should be pointing upwards. This is brilliant. This makes perfect sense. If I were then to work on a shader or whatever, and I was like, okay, well, I don't really think this texture is working. Let's swap it with another texture. And if I were to then, let me just go back to my mouse. Oh, what's happened here? No, I don't want to draw. I want my... one second, there we go. Get my pen back. Delete. Let's just put it over here. So this has a nice direction to it. It goes up. Again, we can invert it if we need to. Sometimes it might want to come down, and that might be the leading edge. That might be the leading edge. We can't really solve that. But this texture, well, this texture is not useful. It has a directionality to it. It has a clear point. It is like this. This is pointing in a direction. But that direction is not the same as the default direction that we need for velocity aligned particles. Now, this texture has to be imported with a direction to it. Of course it does. But if we make sure that direction is up, then it's more useful. It's easier to work with. So anywhere time we have a directionality to anything, we should make sure that that is up and down. Again, this one's probably set up correctly. It's got directionality. There's a fixed base here that is obviously not sort of alphaed out, and so this goes up. Up means it's set up correctly. Same here. We can easily see, hopefully, our muzzle flash here and our crunch impact. If I open them both, it's very easy to swap that texture. And the shader is going to be doing the same thing, but now look slightly different because the texture is different, but it's still going to be working because there's a certain level of continuity to the directionality. Do we have anything else that's sort of velocity aligned in here? Not loads, to be fair. But hopefully that makes sense. There has to be a direction to our textures. If we've got a one-dimensional directional thing, it has to be imported with that direction. We may as well make it useful. We may as well make it vertical because that works with our sprites. Similarly, two-dimensional, or I guess one-day tiling. Here we have a texture that tiles left and right. That is how I would import my textures. This is not how I would import my textures. There's no reason for this to be set up like this. It's very easy in a material to swap the UV orientation. If I just go to make a new material, if I do, what's the name of the texture? It was energy V, isn't it? I think V doesn't help it find it at all. I go energy plasma. The swizzle command what does swizzle mean? It's a mathematical term, believe it or not. It swaps the order of the expression. So in this case, if I have a texture coordinate and I invert the x and y, we rotate 90 degrees. This is basically a single instruction, I believe. If I go to emissive color red, that'll do. Have a look at my stats. Doesn't give me instruction count anymore. That's interesting. There we go, up here. So base path shader, 171 instructions. If I take that out, 171 instructions. So it's basically free. Let me just compile this to both sides and double check. Not appearing on our instruction count here. So instruction counts are their own bag of worms. But they're a sort of very rough way of talking about optimization and performance. But doing this, swizzling, costs basically nothing. So making sure that all of our textures are imported correctly. So horizontal things are horizontal, vertical things are vertical, is going to make things so much easier to work with. Because if you're working with this texture here, I mean, they've even got alternative things where one's set horizontal and one's set vertical, which, I mean, blows my mind how you decide that this should be vertical and that should be horizontal, but there we go. I'm not critiquing what was made here, but by having them be horizontal all the time, we can swap them out. We can change from one to the other really easily, and it's the kind of thing that creates sort of frictionless workflows. All of our flares are centered. Now, if it's a centered thing, that's pretty obvious. It should be centered. If you import a texture that was this kind of thing but off-centered to here, well, that would be madness. Why would you ever do that? But that's a really clear, obvious way, right? It's very clear. A centered thing should be centered, of course. Well, as soon as I say a horizontal thing or a one-dimensional tiling should be horizontal, that makes sense. But for some reason, it's very easy to sort of think about the context of what we're making, not the texture that we're making. And so here, a lot of these I would say were incorrect. This. And it's just the orientation, but by getting it right, making it unique, making it, consistent rather than unique, we're able to then swap from one to the other much more free-formly, and by doing so create a more of a frictionless workflow. Cool. 2D textures, I said it last week, I say it again now. If it tiles, it tiles. If it should tile, it should just tile. There shouldn't ever be a texture like this that's imported where it doesn't tile, because you never know how it's going to be used. It might be used with panning, it might be used with different UV scales. There's no reason for it not to tile, basically. And so anything two-dimensional, you would do the same. Same with any horizontal. Like if it's got to be a sort of strip across a texture, make sure it tiles. It will just make things more useful in the future. Okay, and you can see here everything I've called T_trail is set up. If we just do trail, set up to be horizontal, and so I can really quickly swap between these things, because that is a very common workflow. You'll make something, you'll lose your texture, you'll be like, not sure the texture, click down, swap it to something else, swap it to this one, swap it to this one. Cool. So texture defaults. If it has a direction, if it's a singly directed thing, it should be velocity aligned, which is directed with up. If it's a horizontal tiling, it should be horizontal, or if it's tiled, it should be tiled, and if it's centered, it should be centered. Be careful of edges. This probably is going to cause problems when we get to lower bitmaps. Well, not too bad. But the edges here are now blending, so making sure that you've got a little bit of a buffer around things. That makes sense. And just generally kind of making sure that your textures are reusable. Certain gradients, we don't need to import gradient textures, we can do them mathematically in the engine. Similarly, we have texture gradients here, so color gradients. For a start, our color gradients should be consistent whether they're horizontal or vertical. I think that sort of seems like a no-brainer. Again, it doesn't really matter in the shader, we can set it up to work the way we need, but then if we swap from a horizontal gradient to a vertical gradient, has it been set up to handle both? There's no need for that extra level of complexity. Just make all of our gradients horizontal, and in fact, these days, we shouldn't really be using gradients anyway. We can use either a curve atlas, or I believe, I might version 5.5. In the latest version of the engine, we can actually do curves, color curves directly in the editor. Might be in the later version. I don't think it's in this one, but that's a thing for another day anyway. But we should be using color curves rather than imported. But if you are going to import them, make sure that they're imported and match the same direction. Why is this vertical? Why is this horizontal? I don't know. Well, I do know. I know exactly why. It's either made by different people or on different days, made at different times for different reasons. It's so easy for this kind of non-standardization to occur. But then eventually what happens is you try and think, oh, I'll just use this one. Oh, it's not set up correctly. Okay. And now someone else has made it, so if I change it, I've got to change all of their work, and then it doesn't work, and then you have two standards where one thing's going one way and one thing's going another, and it just breaks everything. So there we go. Okay, textures, directionality, tiling. Make sure that you've got a good standardization for it. Make sure that it is applied to everything. Meshes, same idea. If I've got some VFX meshes, and let's see, I've got a few things. Lots of VFX meshes are going to be reused between different assets. They're not unique, and so therefore they want to be set up to be as reusable as possible. Now, this has a directionality to it. It's a cone, whether it's a cone that gets bigger or a cone that gets smaller, but it still has a direction. That direction is the x-axis. If I go in here, hexagon plates, let's not do that, scale it uniformly. This also has a directionality to it. It's sort of a flat thing with a little bulge, but it has alignment to the x-axis. This is a sort of bullet. Scale it uniformly, there we go. Let's make sure we've got that the right way around. Yes. Again, it has a directionality to it. It's along the x-axis. This all makes sense. Some point we're going to find one that isn't aligned with the x-axis. Which one is it? Is it this one? That one is. Impact sphere. Here we go. This has a directionality to it as an asset. It is not the same directionality as all the other assets. Why? Why not? It doesn't matter. We can always change it. We can always edit it within our systems, but we want them to be consistent. In this case, this cone, it is directed in the x-axis. Yeah, that's cool. This one has the pivot at the front, and this one has the pivot at the back. Maybe that's standard. Okay, well, maybe we should have imported this one this way around instead, because then when we're working with things, it's very easy to swap from one to the other. There has to be a direction. Your mesh has to be imported in a way where it points in a direction. Why not make that direction be useful? Why not make it be standardized? It will save yourself much bother in the long run. Scale, similarly scale. We just saw as I imported all these meshes, if I go in and select them here and set them all to a default scale of 1, why are they all different sizes? I don't know. Doesn't make any sense. I can totally see a situation where I'm working on an effect where I'm making some kind of bubble shield or a ripple or an impact or something, and I'm like, okay, well, this one's a bit too round, let's swap it for the flat one. What if I take these two assets and I'm just bring them in on top of each other? One of them is twice the size of the other. There is basically no reason for that. We can always scale our models in the editor. If this model was, let's say, half the size, now they're much easier to work with because one of them is the same size as the other. All meshes, when they're imported as this kind of VFX mesh, where it's going to be shared between different assets, that kind of thing, they should have the same size, the same location, the same direction. It just seems so, I don't know, obvious to be. If you're going to have things consistent, you can quickly swap from one to the other. It's going to make things so much easier. Now and again, it depends on the asset. This is a shockwave, so this is aligned, has a directionality where it's expected to be kind of like this 2D space. Fine, but then all your other shockwaves should also match this direction. And this is in terms of size, approximately 20 units by 20 units. Okay, that's fine, but if you've got other assets that have a similar kind of arrangement that are, okay, this one actually is 20 by 20 as well, so there we go. Maybe sometimes they are set up correctly. recoil cylinder. This one is 170 by 170. This is so much bigger. I can totally see a situation where I'd use a cylinder as a shockwave. The fact that this asset and this asset do not work together, and again, they've been made by different people at different times for different reasons, I understand that, but if you have it standardized and you have it organized, I can even select it, it's too small. Something like this. If these are the same size, that's too big, you can see hopefully they're really easy to swap and work with because we're using the same information on both. Cool. Now you might have noticed the whole Bulgari textures material that I have all over this. If you are working with VFX meshes, have a standard material that has some UVs on it. So often you'll be looking at a mesh and you'll have a look at how it's been imported, and then suddenly you'll realize that the UVs aren't correct, because whoever used it brought it in, used it with a material that was, say, weld aligned or something like that didn't matter what the UVs were doing. And so just by having that one step, okay, well, let's assign a UV shader to it. Are these UVs useful? Well, they're all kind of slightly rotated differently from one another. Maybe that's fine, but I might expect the whole thing to be UV'd in such a way that each of these has the same pattern on it. I don't know how the mesh has been used and what have you, but those kinds of decisions and those kinds of ideas make more sense when you assign a texture to it and a material to it that has the UV layout correct. I don't think there's any in this project that don't have good UVs, so that's one thing at least. But by going in, creating a material, and it's super simple, all it is this texture. This is the debug Niagara UV. There's loads of debug textures out there, but it just needs to show you squares so you can see that it's whether it's distorted or not. And the other thing, vertex color, VFX meshes. This is a cylinder. We can see if I go into wireframe, there's my cylinder. Let's just put the vertex colors on as well. Little tip, vertex colors in wireframe will hide the sky sphere. Makes it a bit clearer to see the mesh that you're working on without the background, but there we go. We can see our cylinder. We're never going to have a situation, or very rarely we're going to have a situation where we want to see the edges of this mesh. We're always going to be in VFX doing something to hide this. And so why use a texture? Why waste a texture on that? If we go to vertex colors, I would almost always import this with some vertex coloring on it. So just like a black gradient around the edge, and then fade it off, just so that any hard edges are hidden. If we have a look, there are a couple of textures or materials that have done this. So this is, they've called a black hole vortex mesh. I would probably describe this as a domed donut or domed cylinder, something like that. Seems like a much better name because it doesn't need to be a black hole. Black hole is one use for it, fine, that was the first use it was made for, but it doesn't mean that it might not be used elsewhere. We won't get into the optimization of collapsing some of these verts in the middle, but if this is called domed concave dome mesh or something like that, we know we're never going to want to see these hard edges. We're never going to see the middle, we're never going to see this edge. We can check the UVs and make sure that it's UV'd correctly. Well, we could paint a texture to do this. It's got different UV channels. This is good. I like different UV channels for different use cases. But if we go back to lit and vertex colors, we can see the edges are painted out. So this means that we can very quickly alpha out the hard edges of our mesh. And vertex colors are just the cheapest way to do this, basically. There's no reason not to, and it allows us to very quickly access that. So when it comes to meshes, they should be a consistent direction, a consistent size, and they should have vertex colors painted by default. And that means that when we're swapping and quickly changing from one to the other, everything is set up in the way that makes sense. We don't know all the future uses that might happen with the mesh that we're working on. Someone might come along and be like, oh, this is the perfect mesh for my thing. Okay, the vertex colors are wrong. Okay, well, I don't know if the vertex colors have been used somewhere else for some other reason. I don't want to check everything and break something. I'll just import a new mesh with the vertex colors correctly. Creates extra work, creates extra kind kind of potential problems and just creates duplicates of data. So make sure we're using a consistency to these things. Okay, so we've had to talk about textures, we've had to talk about materials, about models, about meshes. Now I want to have a look at some of the node graphs. Actually didn't want to close that. Let's open that again. Window, content browser. I have here a few examples. Now, again, I will caveat this. There are new tools which we'll be talking about using here that probably didn't exist when these assets were made. The Paragon assets now are pretty old. And also, Unreal has this horrible habit of moving things around when you go from version to version. And so some of the layouts here, which are not very well laid out, are potentially the cause of the engine updating as opposed to the artist who made it originally. So I don't want to be too critical about these, but I have here 3 materials that I just grabbed from the starter content that I started with, and we can see hopefully that they aren't very usefully laid out. So as I've said multiple times now, banging on the same point, everything has to have a place, everything has to have a position in space, everything has to have a name. We should make sure that those things are working for us, not against us. So first thing, lots of lines on top of each other. This kind of thing is very much what happens when we migrate from version to version, so I'm not going to be too negative about it. But we can very quickly see how we can miss things. This isn't even connected. There's a really useful tool up here, Clean Up. Now there are reasons to leave unconnected stuff. Maybe you want to keep it for later, maybe you want to keep an idea that you had that you don't want to get rid of, but copy and paste it into the dev folder, copy and paste it into your test environments. There is, I didn't talk about this last week, but there is a folder called developers. This is exactly for that. It's where you put your tests and your examples and things like that isn't going to get built into the game. Anything that's not connected, well, just clean it up. Unreal will automatically delete anything that's not used in the network. And we can kind of see immediately how there's some strangeness going on just by organizing and kind of like laying this out. Unreal has a couple of tools that we can use. If we select 2 nodes, Shift WASD will do alignment. So Shift W and S is really useful. Shift A and D is basically pointless. It just lines things on top of each other. Why that doesn't do kind of an equally spaced or something like that, I don't know. If you work at Epic, please fix this. I never want to align 2 nodes on top of each other. It's just not true. I suppose actually that's not true, because sometimes I want to align them like this and then I want to do that, so Shift W. But an equally spaced node alignment would be really nice. If I select these 3 and I press, I don't know, Shift E, Shift Q, something like that, it would just align them correctly for me, make things much easier. Anyway, there we go, rant aside. You can see hopefully by just making things a bit wider, a bit clearer, the material is much easier to read. If I come in, I've broken it now, but if I go to the one that I have actually updated, I spent a little bit of time clearing this out. It's much easier to see what's happening. Comments, we can put comments around nodes, select some nodes, hit C, we get comments. It's worth doing, explaining either to yourself in the future or to your colleagues what something's doing. This is quite a simple material, it probably doesn't need loads of comments, but at the same time it takes seconds and can cause or can save huge amounts of confusion later on. We can comment individual nodes, comes up with the comment option down here, or we can comment boxes. We can colorize our comment boxes. I mean, really, depending on the complexity of the thing you're doing, there's loads of cool things you can do to make it clear what's happening. Yeah, hidden information. So the original material had this set up. I noticed we're adding 0.1 to the UVs of our mask. That seems a bit of an odd thing to be doing. Well, why are we doing it? Well, if we have a look inside the text chord, our UV tiling is set to 0.8.8. So if I just correct this set all those defaults back to 0. This is our texture as imported, and whoever made the shader decided that it just needed to be zoomed in slightly. Perfectly fine, no problem with that. We definitely don't want to import another texture that's slightly zoomed in. That's really, really wasteful. So what do? Well, we want to make it clear for the end user, or the whoever in our future is going to use this, that that's what we've done. So rather than doing a black box hard baked numbers in here, 0.8, 0.1, we can use scale UVs by center. Now if I do this, exact same result, mathematically identical to what we had, but the values in here are set to default 1, 1. We don't need to go in and explore it, and all we've done is we've scaled here. So before it was 0.8, now we're doing the inverse of that, so it's 1 divided by 0.8 gives us our 1.25, and so we now have a clearer and easier to read graph. If we're doing tiling, let's say we have a tile texture, let's just use the same texture, it's fine. Find in content browser, and in here, there we go. We have the option to make this 2 by 2 in here. That's fine, that works. But it very clearly, or it doesn't very clearly show what's happening. If I do this, set this back to 1 by 1, mathematically, again, identical, but now we've made it very clear to whoever's using this, okay, this is a texture that we're multiplying by a 2 by 2 to change the tiling. Much easier to see what's happening, much easier to work with, much easier to edit. There's basically no good reason, as far as I'm concerned, to ever edit these values, because we can always just do it outside and make it clearer and see what's happening. Cool. A couple other things. Talking about alignment and arrangement. If I'm here, I've got a sphere mask, I've got a few different inputs to it. That works. It's 3 nodes, they're all plugged in together, but it's not as clear and concise as it could be. There are ways we can make this easier to read. So for example, the 2 inputs, I would align the 2 inputs. Now, these two, because of their sort of geographical relationship, because they're aligned vertically here along the same grid line, they have a sort of connection to them. While they're both used in this sphere mask, it's the same thing, it's the same nodes, it's really subtle, but over time this kind of little arrangement working for us will really, really help with our materials. We've got 2 sphere masks here that are doing something together, they're being multiplied together over here eventually. Well, put them on the same line. I can clearly see that these things are connected to this. Probably want to have these a little bit more like this. So I've kind of got layers of inputs. So this is the final result, this multiply. This is my first set of inputs, is 2 sphere masks. This is my inputs to my sphere masks. There's a geographical or a physical, not physical, the digital objects, but there is a 2D grid relationship to them that makes it clearer and easier to see what's happening. If I go back to the unclean one, I fixed this too much I think already. Oh no, I didn't save, that's fine. There's some element of it, these two are obviously aligned. Again, the engine might have moved things around. These should be like this, blah blah blah. But we can hopefully see how, by just doing a quick pass on the arrangement, we haven't changed any of the functionality, I haven't disconnected anything, I haven't reconnected anything. Well, I guess down here I did, but the functionality of the material is exactly the same. But by opening this and looking at this, we're going to see it much, much clearer, much easier to work with. Cool. Simple materials like the one we just saw, you want to have definitely still have it be clean and clear and see what's happening, but it doesn't need too much level of complexity. A bit like I said last week, we can all agree that a really disorganized material is bad, and a material where every node is on top of each other is really bad, and so somewhere in between the two we want to have a good layout. And so as we go for more complicated material, again we can see that there's a lot going on here that just doesn't really make any sense. There's a load of nodes that are unconnected, and clean those up. Node paths that come back on themselves, not a fan. These two textures very clearly have a relationship. This one is the D, which I guess is depth, and this is the normal. Well, they should be using the same UVs. There's no reason we'd ever want them not to use the same UVs. So we should just use the same node twice. They're completely obviously designed to work together. And so now if we were going to edit some UVs, we could edit it once and not edit it twice. Really basic things like that. And so on. Now this is a really good example of how not to name our parameters. If we go to the parameters tab, let's get rid of this again. We have here a few different parameters. Intensity, okay, cool, that makes sense. I can scale up or down my intensity. Okay, well, what's the intensity of? Well, it's the intensity of the world position offset. So we should probably call it that. Intensity world position offset. It's not the intensity of the emissive, it's not the intensity of the scale or size or brightness. It's the intensity of the world position offset that we've got in our shader. So give it a name that makes sense. It has to have a name. Use the name for us. We have a parameter called I think. Is that an I or an L? I have no idea what this does. And in fact, plugging in all these different values doesn't tell me anything. So it's actually using pixel depth offset, which isn't going to give us any information here because we don't have any objects behind. But maybe give that a name that makes sense. PDO or pixel depth offset. Whoever's using this in the future is going to want the names to mean something. It has to have a name, make it mean something. Param. Oh, nothing worse when you pick up a project and you've just got param, param1, param2, param3, etc. All these S's. If you open a project or a material and it has all of these things, the first thing you're going to have to do is go in and just clean it up and go through other people's work. Please don't do this. Especially if I'm going to work with you at some point in the future. Really, please don't do this. Everything has a name. Param is currently defaulted to 10.10.01. I have no idea what this does. It looks like a multiplier on the vertex colors for the UV scale. Okay. Hard to see that doing anything. I guess the vertex colors of this mesh aren't set correctly. We'd probably want a default mesh. The default plane here is always going to have white and vertex colors, so it's hard to even sort of visualize what this is doing. But if that's supposed to be a hard-baked value, don't make it a parameter. Constants are just cheaper. If it is going to be a parameter, something we can add, give it a name. It even pops up directly to give us the thing, and we'll call this UV scale, because that seems to be the thing that it's actually doing. It's going into the XY scale here. Cool. Parameters. Scale underscore 1. There's no scale underscore any other number, so why does this have a name? I don't know. What's the scale of? What's the scale of the curl scale WPO? Okay. Curl scale underscore WPO. Now it says something. It means something. It's useful. Speed, WPO, etc. I've given these names. Is that good names? I mean, they're better names than they were, that's for sure. We talked about naming conventions last time. If we do WPO underscore and then the thing, there we go. I can type and then WPO underscore speed. Now, when I go to my parameters tab, they are arranged nearby because they are named correctly in a way that makes sense. This is less so much of a thing these days. We can create parameter groups, and so what I would do is I would create a parameter group called world position offsets, and now I can go in and I can make sure that my parameters exist in a parameter group, and because of that the name isn't so useful, or the naming convention isn't so important. We can't have two parameters called speed, so if we had a panning speed and a world position offset speed, we'd need to differentiate them somehow with a name, but in this case we can also create a sort of a category and put things in that, and so we can do this way as well. So for more complex materials. The more complicated the material is, the more important it is to have everything nicely named and sorted and organized, because the more difficult it's going to be for someone to come in and sort of pass that as a new person. So in this case, yeah, I would do this. There's no reason why it can't have both. Obviously, we can put either world position offset as a prefix or a suffix. And now it's clear that this is the speed for that as opposed to the speed for anything else. It's just very easy if you're working on a material, you're like, okay, I want a parameter for speed, and suddenly we've got two parameters called speed. And then if I set this to 250, it's going to update in both places. And so having done this myself multiple times, where you're just like, oh, okay, parameter speed, and you realize you've already got speed, or intensity, you've already got intensity. It just makes sense to make your material parameter names just that little bit clearer. If I make an instance, like so, I can save this. Let me just apply it. We can see it a lot clearer. By searching by parameter name, let's have a look. Will it search the group as well? So if I take speed WPO out of here and make sure it's in the WPO group. Yes, so by searching, it will search via the name of the group as well. So all of the same idea before. If I want parameters that don't relate to WPO, I should be able to do a not. It doesn't like that, does it? Will it do or? If I do that and or pixel depth offset. No. Okay, so this search doesn't like the same Boolean inputs as the other one. But there we go. But yeah, everything should be within a parameter name, a parameter group. There's one way we can make this even more useful. I would have within my parameter groups, that's now going to be searched by name or sorted by name. So if I go in here and let's create another group that is our PDO, and then we'll have another parameter. Let's just make these parameters. We'll call this depth, and we'll call this normal. And we'll make a group that is textures. Now, if I apply this and have a look at our reference, our instance again, now it might be that the alphabetized order you've got here is what you want. Entirely up to you. Depends again on the project you're making, on the things you're doing. Well, I personally would say, well, the textures are the most important thing, so I want those to be at the top. And so if I go into my group name, I'm going to call this 00 textures. And I'm going to set this up in a way that's unique, consistent, not unique, that's consistent to all materials in my project. So textures is always 0, 1. And then let's say normals. Well, this doesn't have normals, but let's say we did have some sort of normal control in here. This goes into normal, it's not even being used. Let's just do a flatten normal. This, and then scalar parameter, normal, flatness. And I'm going to say my normals are always 0, 1. Something like that. Now, the reason we do this is make it clear what we're working with, but it allows us when we go into functions to share data between different materials. So we haven't used any functions in here, but if we had a custom function within that, we could put our parameters, and if we know that our normals are always going to be our 01 normal, or whatever it is that we've set for our project, we're going to be able to kind of make that clear and share that between things. If our numbering is different for every material type, suddenly we can get in a mess where we've used 03 normal over here and 02 normal over here, and we can't combine the two. So if we go in at the start and we say, right, these are our numbers, these are our categories, these are our things, and you can sort of set that up. And I'll show you an example of that in a bit. Cool. Okay, we've talked about arrangements and layouts and naming and parameter sections. One more material I want to look at, and that's this one here. This is a real complicated material, bit of a mess. Now, how we're going to clean this up? Well, the more complicated you get, as I mentioned a minute ago, the more clear we want things to be. And so if I open this one up, what I've done is I've used named reroutes. These were a new edition not that long ago, but they are amazing in terms of clarity of material. This section refers to the emissive. The output here is a named reroute called emissive. Very easy to make. You just call a named reroute node, give it a name, and then you can set the color. Personally, I like mine to be blue. I don't know why, I just have them all set to blue. But obviously it depends on your project, what you're doing. You can have them different colors, etc. But by having a input here to a named reroute, we now have a named reroute there. We can have the emissive output, and we can refer to our graph like so. Very clear to see what the material is doing here at the output level. Very easy. If I double click this node, it'll take me to the input, and we can see now what this is doing. This is commented, and it allows us to share things between materials as well, or between sections. So in the original material, our textures section actually output and connected to the emissive. That makes sense, but it's also connected to the normals. It's also connected to other things. So if I create a texture output named reroute, I can connect it to both, and I'm able to compartmentalize what I'm doing. And so I know here what I'm doing is I've got some UV distortion. Oh, didn't like that. I just want it on these ones. So this is UV distortion, comment UV distortion, and then that's affecting the UVs of this. And here we've got our 4 textures. Note that I've lined up my 4 texture samplers because they're all doing a thing. This is a nice way of working. This now is created, and that's a, I mean, that's a little bit specific, but I don't know, personally I think it's important. It'll save you time in the long run. But we can see where the outputs connect to the other parts of the network, and it's quite easy once you get used to it where to do this, and it makes such a difference. I can open this material, I can immediately say, okay, I want to affect the emissive. Where's the emissive section? Okay, I can just look at this. I don't need to pass and understand everything else that's happening in my shader or someone else's shader. I can just go in and say, right, this is the bit that I want to edit. Okay, let's fix the bug here or whatever. Optimize that. As well as named reroutes, we have actual reroutes. Just double click and we can create a reroute, or they're called reroute, add reroute node, and they just allow us to kind of control the wiring. Again, doesn't do anything in terms of the functional output of the project, doesn't change any optimization, doesn't change any appearance, anything at all. It just makes it easier to work with within the material. And you can see here the OCD kicking in. This I don't like. It's not as clean as it could be. I would just take a minute, bring this across. Sometimes lining up the grid can be a bit of a pain, but now this is crossing. Try not to cross things if we don't need to. And now this isn't straight, so now it's there, and now it's just a little bit clearer. Adds and multiplies. Adds and multiplies are order independent. Adding things together, multiplying things, doesn't matter if you do AB or BA. So this is a cardinal sin. There's no reason for this whatsoever. It just creates spaghetti networks. It's so easy for our materials to become networks of spaghetti lines and what have you. And so just if anything we can do to make it a little bit clearer, just make the time to do it. Divide and what's the other one? Subtract are order important. So if we've got a divide or a subtract or something, it makes sense that you have to have the right things and the right inputs, but then just rearrange the graph. I don't know, let's say this was a divide instead, and I wanted to divide these two inputs. Well, if this is the way around that we want it, that's fine. If it wants to be this way around, I'll just move this stuff up here and then move the whole thing down again. Now our inputs are not crossing anymore. It makes more sense if we're thinking about dividing. Well, we're going to think about the numerator first and then the denominator. Is that the way around? I can't remember. The top number first and then the bottom number, and so we're going to have our top number here at the first. Super minor but important. It will add up. Cool. Okay. Materials, reroutes, named reroutes, good parameter names, parameter groups, aligning inputs geographically, or kind of vertical alignments, horizontal alignments, This is very clear what this is doing. If this is like this, yeah, it's all fine, it still works, but that takes me longer to understand. And if you extrapolate that to a really complicated material, a really complex system and network of what's happening, it's going to be fractions of seconds, but they add up. To make it clear. Okay, talk about materials, talk about parameter names, parameter sections, layouts, reroutes, all of that good stuff. Hopefully now you're getting an idea of the way I like things to be: neat, tidy, clear, clean, all of those things. When we get to Niagara, obviously the same thing applies. Now this is just something I've checked together with examples, but immediately upon opening it, I know that whoever's made this, which was me a few hours ago, has decided these two are connected and these two are connected, because just by virtue of them being a few kind of different gaps, or at least I would assume, because that's the way I work, that these two have a connection and these two have a connection. Now, again, this is perfectly valid. There is nothing different about what's happening here in terms of performance or output, but by using the geographic location, we can create some connections. And so if this was, say, fire, this was, say, smoke, we can compartmentalize. Makes sense. Why would you not? Everything's got a nice name. They all came that way, but do add names to things. It is important. Comment boxes, great. And again, using the layout and the way that you want. Now, I would generally start here and move across. That's the way things are going to work. But as we get more and more things, we're going to spread them out more. So let's say these are all fire emitters. If I just duplicate them a few times. Now, is this clear and clean in terms of what the shader or what the system is doing? Yep, I've got fire in here, we've got smoke in here. Is it the best use of layout? Well, we've got a 2D screen here. We've got an aspect ratio to the window that we're looking in. If I do this, this is as close as we can get, but we've got lots of wasted space. Now we've got less wasted space. It's clearer and easier to see what's happening. We can sort of click on the different things. We can almost work at this level of zoom, whereas if this is over here, it's harder based on how big this is for that to get closer. And in fact, there's actually an even better way. If I take my 6 emitters and then stack those and then bring this in, we're now even closer when I bring this back. That's going to be the best arrangement. We've got the least amount of wasted space. Think about it like a UV layout. You're not going to waste space on a UV texture. Well, we've got a similar thing here. We've got a 2D plane. We've got information we want to fit in it. Why would we ever waste that information? Why would we ever waste that space? It's not going to change your life, but it is going to make you a better teammate and easier to work with. And so why would you not? Cool. Couple more things with Niagara. We have user parameters. So in this case, I just have 3. One to control the size of my assets, one to control the burst rate, burst size, burst scale, and burst rate scale. As things get more complicated, we're going to have huge amounts of user parameters down here, depending on what we're making. All the same things apply, good naming conventions, etc. But Niagara's taken it one step further. It has this thing here, edit hierarchy. We can, you can see I've created some already. We can organize and sort these things. So in this case, we could have a spawn category, just take those, put them in the category there, size, have a category there. We could create another one, color. And notice I'm using the naming or the numbering. Again, I would like these to be consistent across everything in the project. Color may be more important than size, I don't know. But set it once, stick to it. And so on. So if I make a new color, and we'll call this, I don't know, color tint, and then edit hierarchy, and just put that in there. And now we've got a nicely organized user input, which is what we want. Hopefully this thing will come to materials at some point. There's sort of no reason for it not to exist for those categorization groups. Again, it's just an editor thing, but it doesn't exist yet, but hopefully it's on Epic's roadmap. Cool. I think that's it for Niagara. Again, naming, parameter names, all of the stuff, it's just repeating myself, but make sure that they are set correctly, useful. You will appreciate it in the long run when you come back to work that you did months ago. Blueprints. Now, I'm not going to go too far into blueprints. They can get way more complicated than what we've already been talking about, but it's all the same principles. Things arranged nicely, things commented out. In this case, we're using a sequence node to create these sequences. Why does this not have a comment? I don't know. What does it do? Who knows? We should have added a comment on there. But we can see, hopefully in here, generally there's some thought into the layout of where things go and what they do. This node's obviously, or these nodes are obviously connected, so they're near each other geographically. I don't really like this. Why does this not come a bit further? And then these could go in here, and then it's really obvious. We have an infinite 2D plane. Now, it doesn't make sense to spread things out massively. Obviously, that's a terrible idea. But we have enough space that we can kind of use those spaces to our advantage. This is getting a bit messy. Why is everything on top of each other? Spread things out a little bit more. Use reroute nodes. Double click, create a reroute node. That kind of thing. Cool. All right. Just with materials, let's see if the proof is in the pudding. I have in here on the marketplace 2 water material packs that I have made. And so if I go into here and open the lake material, this is from years and years ago. This is before reroute nodes existed and before named reroutes existed. So you can see they are not being used. But hopefully you can also see, I mean, this was, I don't know, God, 10 years ago maybe I made this. Some horrific amount of time ago. But even then there was an idea of consistency to things. I've got here 2 different vats that are blending together. Well, you can see the layout of them exactly the same. The textures that are inputs are aligned, this is aligned. Some of this has been through multiple project migrations, which is why things like this don't line up anymore. But there's definitely a sort of clarity to it. It's well boxed out, it's got comments. Yes, there's big lines that come across here. Again, named reroutes didn't exist back in the day, and so this is before that. But hopefully you can see the consistency. Oh, this maybe should be lined up better. It's not perfect, but it's not bad considering the tools of the time. If we look now at the material that I've just made, this was earlier this year. If I go materials, lake and water lake, nice clean named reroutes, all the shader, comments within comments, color coded comments. This is as clear and as I can make it. Functions, we have here functions within which there are parameters. Potentially, no, not in this case, but we can see we've got a nice clear sort of sub function that we're going to use multiple times, and so by putting that into a function, that saves us having to recreate that in the material. So it's really worth doing. If I have a look at a instance of this, there probably was one already. My group numbers, color is always 0, normals is always 10, opacity is always 20. And the reason we use blocks of 10 numbers in here, we're sort of future-proofing it against ourselves. Let's say we had normals, but let's say we had detail normals. Well, detail normals needs to live with normals, but it doesn't want to be 50. If we just use the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., there's nowhere within that to add more information. So by putting our numbers at 10, 20, if I have detailed normals, I can put detailed normals at 15. I've given myself space for the future. There's no reason these numbers need to be consistent and be consecutive. We can create gaps within them when we're setting them up, and then later on when we come along and we say, okay, cool, yeah, opacity, well, let's say we have, I don't know, a new one in here, animated opacity or something like that. We can create a new parameter group, and we've given ourselves 9 inputs. If we run out, Okay, well, that happens. If you find 10 things you want to put between opacity and normals, then unfortunately you haven't given yourself enough space. But by giving us a little bit of space, we can create inputs like this. Similarly with our function inputs, if you're making functions, we have here an input value. Oh, I've not done it on this one. Oh, sort of. Okay. Well, not always as consistent with myself as I'd like to be. We have here sort priority. This will give us the ability to sort the input numbers or the input arrangement, and we want this to be done by importance or by grouping things that make sense to be grouped together. So in this case, this is to do with moving water normals around. We've got the texture itself, the UVs, and then speed and intensity. I've been inconsistent in my naming, which annoys me, so I'm going to fix that. Here we go. Go back to here. Now I need to just recreate the node. Maybe I can just close the material and reopen it, and it should update the name. Yes, there we go. So you can see the level of thing I want to deal with. I want them all to be consistent and the same, because it will save things. Anyway, so yes, we've got 4 inputs. We want to put them in an order that makes sense. So I'm going to use the sort order priority for that, and I'm not going to use 0, 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to use input texture 0, and then UVs 10, normals speed 20, normals intensity 30. And again, these are just going to be sorted by number. Doesn't matter what the actual number itself is, it's only relative numbers that matter. And so now if I wanted to add something between speed and intensity, well, I can create a new input and I can use 25, and I know that's going to work. And so again, giving ourselves space within what we're making for working in the future, because there's nothing worse when you're like, oh, I need a new input, oh, but it would make much more sense being there, and then you have to go in and renumber all of your inputs, because you want it to be correct and you want it to be right, so you're going to do the work, but it's going to be tedious work that's wasting time, where if you just set it up correctly in the first place, it would have been much better. Okay, so we have talked a lot. There is one more thing I want to mention, but before we do that, quick recap. We did texture conventions. Textures need to be directional, using velocity alignment, so the direction we want for default is up. Side to side textures, 1D, make them side to side, don't have them vertical, or if they want them to be vertical, make everything vertical. Like, it's consistency is the important thing. All noises tiling, defaults for models, vertex colors, UVs, directions and size, all be consistent. And then material layouts, it really makes a difference to make it clear, and setting things up. And then the final thing, it's not so much a sort of default, but there is a feature that I love. I think it is one of the most useful things in Unreal that no one uses it. We have camera bookmarks. Every level has its own set of camera bookmarks. Now, if I'm new to a project and I open up a level, first thing I want to do is press the numbers 1 to 5 or whatever it is, and look through the camera bookmarks that whoever's made that level has decided are important. Now in this case, let's say we have one here, control 1, saved bookmark. They're like control groups in an RTS. Let's say we want a top down, maybe we'll have the mountain over here that's important, control 3. It takes literally seconds to create our points of interest. There's no reason to not use them. They don't cost anything. They're not hard to create. And it just means that when you jump into a level, you've got bookmarks. Someone else can jump in and they can be like, oh, okay, that's important. That's an important area. That's a nice area. Okay, this is something that they've been working on. It's a way of communicating with the person in your team or with you in the future or whatever it is, without having to write documentation. No one's going to read the documentation anyway. Just create some camera bookmarks. Every time you jump into a level, press the numbers, see that there's bookmarks be created. It will make things so much easier for you and your teammates and everything. All of this stuff, as I say, doesn't create any optimization, doesn't create any better artwork at the end of it. It just makes things easier to work with. And at the end of the day, we just want an easy job. We don't want to have to fight through multiple materials or textures that have been used in the wrong way and all of these things. We want it nice and clean and clear and easy to understand. Okay, that feels like enough whittering on for me. Thank you very much. If you've listened to all of this, please take it on board. Please try and put this into your own materials, your own textures, projects, all of it. It really does make it easier to work with if everything has this sort of standardization to it, whether that's naming, whether that's folder structure, whether that's assets. It will just make your life and the life of your teammates easier. Cool. As always, big thank you to my Patreon supporters. If you want to support the channel, go over to Patreon. That's really great. Please do that. And if you want to learn more about game art, VFX, I have courses on materials, blueprints, Niagara systems, all of that over on Udemy and Gumroad, and hopefully some new stuff coming there soon. So as always, yes, big thanks to everyone. Thank you for listening to me whittle on for hours and hours. If you think that's been helpful, or if you have any comments or feedback, please do put it below, and I might do another follow-up video in a bit. We'll see how we get feedback on things. So but yes, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing all your super neat projects when I come and work with you in the future.